From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Since the emergence of the threat from Islamist-inspired terrorism, our country has made significant progress in disrupting plots and protecting the public. But it is time to say enough is enough.
12 people have been arrested in London after 3 attackers killed 7 people and injured 48 more Saturday night, after attackers rammed a van into pedestrians on London Bridge, then stabbed people in Borough Market. The 3 attackers were shot dead by police. It's the 3rd terror attack in the UK in 3 months. Britain's national elections are on Thursday. We'll go to London for an update from Guardian columnist Paul Mason. President Trump used the London attacks to call for the U.S. to impose his proposed Muslim travel ban. Then, is the Trump administration attempting to erase history by returning to Congress copies of the Senate's explosive 2014 report on CIA torture? Copies of the classified report could now be buried in Senate vaults or even destroyed, and along with it, lessons from one of the darkest chapters in America's history.
We're in a situation that's worse than the beginning of the war on terror. And when torture was used, when Dick Cheney said we have to operate in the dark side, what he didn't say was what was going to be the consequence of that torture.
And as Donald Trump pulls the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, nearly 200 U.S. mayors have signed on to an agreement to uphold the commitments to the goals enshrined in the accord. We'll go to California to speak with the Senate President Pro Tem Kevin De Leon about new legislation to put the state on a path to 100% clean, renewable energy by the year 2045.
When Trump goes rogue, California goes mainstream, and mainstream is dealing with climate change.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In London, at least 12 people have been arrested after 3 attackers killed 7 people and injured 48 more Saturday night. The attackers rammed a van into pedestrians on London Bridge, then stabbed people in Borough Market. The 3 attackers were shot dead by police. This is a witness to the attack.
It was fear on the streets of London, basically. I've not experienced that before. I've been there for 12 odd years, basically. That I've never seen that kind of fear, especially on a night out. And it was horrific to be involved in that kind of situation.
ISIS claimed responsibility for Saturday's attack, which came less than 2 weeks after 22 people were killed in a bombing in Manchester at an Ariana Grande concert. On Sunday, Ariana Grande held a memorial concert in Manchester to raise money for the bombing victims and their families. Following Saturday's attack, Britain's Conservative Party and the opposition Labour Party temporarily suspended campaigning for the national elections this Thursday. British Prime Minister Theresa May has vowed to conduct a sweeping review of Britain's counter-terrorism strategy, saying enough is enough. London's Mayor Sadiq Khan also spoke out after the attack.
Well, there aren't words to describe the grief and anger that our city will be feeling today. I'm appalled and furious that these cowardly terrorists would deliberately target innocent Londoners and bystanders enjoying their Saturday night. There can be no justification for the acts of these terrorists, and I'm quite clear that we will never let them win, nor will we allow them to cower our city or Londoners. Londoners will see an increased police presence today and over the course of the next few days. No reason to be alarmed. One of the things the police and all of us need to do is make sure we're as safe as we possibly can be. I'm reassured that we are one of the safest global cities in the world, if not the safest global city in the world. But we always evolve and review ways to make sure that we remain as safe as we possibly can.
Following London Mayor Sadiq Khan's remarks, President Donald Trump took to Twitter to attack the mayor, tweeting, quote, "At least 7 dead and 48 wounded in terror attack, and Mayor of London says there's no reason to be alarmed." In fact, Mayor Khan had been speaking about the increased police presence in the city when he said there was no reason to be alarmed. A spokesman for Mayor Khan later dismissed Trump's comments, responding the mayor, quote, has more important things to do than respond to Donald Trump's ill-informed tweet that deliberately takes out of context his remarks urging Londoners not to be alarmed when they saw more police, including armed officers on the streets, unquote. The United States acting ambassador to Britain, Lou Lukens, contradicted President Trump, tweeting, quote, I commend the strong leadership of the mayor of London as he leads the city forward after this heinous attack, unquote. Khan is London's first Muslim mayor. President Trump also launched a tweet storm this morning and over the weekend, calling for the courts to allow him to impose his Muslim travel ban, which would prohibit all refugees and citizens of 6 majority Muslim countries from entering the United States. On Saturday, Trump tweeted, quote, we need to be smart, vigilant, and tough. We need the courts to give us back our rights. We need the travel ban as an extra level of safety, unquote. This morning, Trump tweeted, quote, people, the lawyers, and the courts can call it whatever they want, but I'm calling it what we need, and what it is a travel ban, unquote. The Trump administration has asked the Supreme Court to allow the ban to be in effect until a full Supreme Court ruling. We'll have more on the London attack, the upcoming British elections, and Trump's proposed Muslim travel ban after headlines. In Afghanistan, deadly violence continued in the capital, Kabul, over the weekend. At least 20 people were killed in a series of explosions Saturday at a funeral for one of the protesters who was killed during demonstrations on Friday. At least 5 people were killed at Friday's protests. The demonstrators were demanding the resignation of Afghan President Ashraf Ghani over Wednesday's massive suicide bombing in a diplomatic area of Kabul, which killed more than 90 people and wounded over 400. In Iraq, Reuters reports dozens of civilians, including women and children, were killed over the weekend trying to escape an ISIS-held area of Mosul amidst the ongoing U.S. offensive to retake control of Mosul. An aid worker says some of the civilians were shot by ISIS militants while they were trying to flee the Zanjili neighborhood. Air Wars says 20 civilians were reportedly killed on Thursday in that same neighborhood by shelling and airstrikes likely launched by the U.S.-backed Iraqi military. Among those reportedly killed by the shelling was a young civilian named Hussein Abbas, who was killed along with some of his siblings. In a major diplomatic crisis in the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, Yemen, Libya, and the United Arab Emirates have broken off relations with Qatar, accusing Qatar of backing militant groups, including ISIS and al-Qaeda. Qatar has denied the accusations. The United Arab Emirates has suspended all flights and sea travel to and from Qatar. Saudi Arabia has also closed all ports between the two countries. Back in the United States, thousands of people demonstrated Saturday at dozens of March for Truth rallies to demand an independent congressional commission to investigate possible collusion between the Trump campaign and alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election. Protests were held in nearly every single U.S. state. This comes as former FBI Director James Comey is slated to testify to the Senate Intelligence Committee on Thursday. Trump fired Comey in part over the FBI's investigation into the Trump campaign's ties to Russia. Despite speculation over the weekend, it appears President Trump will not try to block Comey's testimony. HBO is facing mounting calls to fire late-night host Bill Maher after the comedian used the N-word during his live interview with Nebraska Republican Senator Ben Sasse on Friday night.
To Nebraska more. You're welcome. We'd love to have you work in the fields with us. Work in the fields? That's part of that. That's Senator. I'm a house. No, it's a joke.
Bill Maher has since apologized for using the racial slur. In news on Honduras, a handful of international funders say they'll stop financing the Agua Zarca hydroelectric dam, which has faced years of resistance, including from murdered environmental activist Berta Cáceres, who was fighting the project when she was assassinated in 2016. The Guardian reports Dutch bank FMO and Finnish finance company Finnfund have announced they'll withdraw from the project entirely. The dam's largest financier, the Central American Bank of Economic Integration, says it's already stopped funding the project. In news from Colombia, Amnesty International is condemning the Colombian government for its repression and excessive use of force in the port city of Buenaventura, where Afro-Colombian residents are on their 21st day of a general strike to protest the lack of basic services, including clean drinking water. Amnesty says the Colombian government has been dropping tear gas canisters from helicopters and breaking into people's homes. It also says children, elderly people, and protesters have been injured by security forces firing excessive tear gas and live ammunition. In Mexico, radio journalist and indigenous activist Marcela de Jesus Natalia is in critical condition after she was shot in the head in the southern state of Guerrero Saturday as she was leaving the radio station where she hosts a morning program. At least 6 Mexican journalists have been assassinated this year. Back in the United States, a criminal sexual assault trial against comedian Bill Cosby begins in Pennsylvania today. Andrea Constand, the former director of operations for the women's basketball team at Temple University, has accused Cosby of drugging and sexually assaulting her at his home in 2004. Cosby was an alum of Temple University. Constand was one of 60 women who have accused Cosby of sexual assaults dating back decades. And in New York City, more than 100 Jewish activists disrupted the Celebrate Israel Day parade on Sunday on the eve of the 50th anniversary of the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. 7 activists were arrested amidst a series of protests. One group of demonstrators locked themselves to each other across Fifth Avenue to protest the New York Police Department's collaboration, they said, with Israeli security forces. Another group of LGBT Jews staged a sit-in holding signs reading, "No pride in apartheid and queer Jews for a free Palestine." And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. British Prime Minister Theresa May has vowed a sweeping review of the nation's counter-terrorism strategy, declaring enough is enough following a terror attack in London Saturday that left 7 dead and dozens injured. British police are holding 11 people. Attackers rammed a van into pedestrians on London Bridge and then stabbed people in nearby Borough Market. The 3 attackers were shot dead by the police. This is a witness to the attack.
It was fear on the streets of London, basically. I've not experienced that before. I've been there for 12 odd years, basically. That I've never seen that kind of fear, especially on a night out. And it was horrific to be involved in that kind of situation.
This is the 3rd terror attack in the UK in 3 months, following the car and knife attack on Westminster Bridge in March, in which 5 people were killed, and the Manchester bombing less than 2 weeks ago, in which 22 people were killed. The Islamic State has claimed responsibility for all 3 of the attacks. Britain's national elections are scheduled this Thursday. The Conservative Party and the opposition Labour Party temporarily suspended campaigning for the parliamentary elections out of respect for the victims, while the right-wing UK Independence Party said it would continue holding campaign events. During an interview this morning, Prime Minister May chaired a meeting of the government's Emergency Committee, COBRA, with intelligence and security chiefs and said response to the attacks is ongoing.
JTAC, that's the Independent Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, have confirmed that the national threat level remains at severe. That means that a terrorist attack is highly likely. The police have reported that they have put additional security measures in place to protect the public and provide reassurance. And this includes additional security measures at a number of bridges in London. The police are working hard to establish the identity of all of those who were tragically killed or injured in the event on Saturday night. But it is now clear that, sadly, victims came from a number of nationalities. This was an attack on London and the United Kingdom, but it was also an attack on the free world.
Prime Minister Theresa May vowed Sunday to conduct a sweeping review of Britain's counter-terrorism strategy, saying enough is enough. London's Mayor Sadiq Khan also spoke out after the attack.
Well, there aren't words to describe the grief and anger that our city will be feeling today. I'm appalled and furious that these cowardly terrorists would deliberately target innocent Londoners and bystanders enjoying their Saturday night. there can be no justification for the acts of these terrorists, and I'm quite clear that we will never let them win, nor will we allow them to cower our city or Londoners. Londoners will see an increased police presence today and over the course of the next few days. No reason to be alarmed. One of the things the police and all of us need to do is make sure we're as safe as we possibly can be. I'm reassured that we are one of the safest global cities in the world, if not the safest global city in the world. But we always evolve and review ways to make sure that we remain as safe as we possibly can.
Sadiq Khan is London's first Muslim mayor. Following his remarks, President Donald Trump took to Twitter to imply the mayor had played down the severity of the attack, tweeting, quote, "At least 7 dead and 48 wounded in terror attack, and Mayor of London says there's no reason to be alarmed." Well, in fact, Khan had been speaking about the increased police presence in the city when he said there was no reason to be alarmed. A spokesman for Khan later dismissed Trump's comments, responding the mayor, quote, "has more important things to do than respond to Donald Trump's ill-informed tweet that deliberately takes out of context his remarks, urging Londoners not to be alarmed when they saw more police, including armed officers on the streets." In contrast to the president, other parts of the U.S. government tweeted more supportive comments. The acting U.S. ambassador to London, Lou Lukens, tweeted, "I commend the strong leadership of the mayor of London as he leads the city forward after this heinous attack." All of this comes as British Prime Minister May has also called for increased web surveillance, so the internet is no longer a, quote, safe space for terrorists, unquote. For more, we go to London, where we're joined by Paul Mason, columnist for The Guardian. His most recent book, Post-Capitalism, A Guide to Our Future. Paul, welcome back to Democracy Now! Can you first respond to the attacks and then talk about Donald Trump's attack on Sadiq Khan, the first Muslim mayor of London, as he tries to calm and reassure Londoners?
Well, good morning, Amy. Here in London, I think it's worth saying we are implacable. We're standing firm. You know, ordinary British people fought those attackers back with chairs and bottles and whatever they could lay their hands on. 2 unarmed British policemen fought them with their bare hands until only 8 minutes after the first emergency call, a squad of armed police went in and shot them dead. 8 minutes after the incident started. So we're pretty clear that we have an immediate response facility to this kind of terror attack. But the worrying thing is that they are increasing. 3 in the last 70 days, successful ones. 5, it's been revealed today, thwarted. So we've got an increased tempo of jihadi attacks on civilians here, ordinary people on the streets of Britain. And just to situate things, Borough Market is a Saturday night venue for people to go and have fun. It's a bit like Venice Beach in LA. It's like the district below Manhattan Bridge in New York, in Brooklyn. It's that kind of place. It's full. It's teeming with people doing what? Drinking alcohol, wearing as little as possible as the spring turns into summer here. Men and women having fun together, men and men, women and women. It's a very liberal place. That's what those attackers were attacking. And the majority of British people, including the majority of Britain's 3 million Muslim population, say no to this.
And Paul Mason, you've pointed out that the number of attacks in the UK, this was the 3rd that occurred in as many months. What do you think accounts for the fact that ISIS is stepping up its campaign there?
Well, we don't know. We don't see all the intelligence. But my hunch is this. My hunch is that that many Islamist militants and radicals across the world have been inspired by the caliphate of ISIS. That is, the semi-state they set up between Mosul and Raqqa in Syria. Now, the end of that state is soon to come. That's becoming pretty clear. Now, I think, in other words, the United States, Europe, Britain, most Western democracies have to worry about what happens when the Islamic Caliphate that ISIS wanted to set up and did indeed set up is finished off and wiped out. What happens? I think that's my hunch. Now, the other problem we have here in Britain, and it's a real issue, I don't think it's going to be solved by blanket travel bans. The real issue is that we have 23,000 people on a list held by our security services who are at risk of becoming dangerous terrorists. That's a very sobering number. 3,000 on a watch list that are being more or less continually under surveillance. And what's worrying is that the last 3 successful attacks involve people who were known to our intelligence services but considered not at risk of becoming violent. We have to ask serious questions about how to deal with that, blame-free questions, because you have to learn from the experience. But the political blame, especially this morning in Britain, is being laid at the door of the government because the government cut 20,000 people from the police. That's about a sixth of the number. They cut 1,300 armed officers. Again, it's a big chunk of the armed contingent of the UK police. They cut them while doing what? Going to Libya, destabilising Libya, pulling out of Libya, bombing Syria, taking part, in numerous wars in the Middle East. The question is not simply, well, if you attack a Middle Eastern country, expect terror. That's facile and simplistic. The question is, if you're going to take part in global in a global intervention into countries like Libya where you create chaos, what happens then? Do you need a better and more well-resourced police force to deal with the potential threat that then comes to you? We don't know yet who did the attack on London Bridge. It is known who they are, but the names are not released. So we don't know what their national background is. But the guy who did the bombing of the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester was a British Libyan, and it turns out his father was one of the fighters that the British had been allowing to travel freely between Britain and Libya because they were anti-Gaddafi. So you have to join up the anti-terror aspect of policing and intelligence with the foreign policy. And this is what many people are now concluding our government just didn't do. They cut the police force, they dabbled in Middle Eastern politics, and it's unfortunately, we're now paying the price of having a very much reduced capability in terms of what? Community policing. We want our cops to be out there walking around the streets where people live, picking up intelligence. It's come out this morning, for example, that one of the guys we think did Saturday night's knife attack had been kicked out of a mosque by that mosque, so the community had done its job. People had reported him to the anti-terror hotline, and then nothing's happened.
Well, this is all coming just before the national elections in Britain on Thursday. Prime Minister May's opponent in the election, Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn, raised just this issue you're talking about, criticising her role in the ensuring that police maintain public safety. He'd previously questioned the wisdom of a shoot-to-kill policy, but said on Sunday the police should use whatever force is necessary to save lives.
We're ready to consider whatever proposals may be brought forward by the police and security services more effectively to deal with the terrorist threat. If Labour is elected, I will commission a report from the security services on Friday on the changing nature of the terrorist threat. Our priority must be public safety, and I will take whatever action is necessary and effective to protect the security of our people and our country. That includes full authority for the police to use whatever force is necessary to protect and save life, as they did last night, as they did in Westminster in March.
During his speech on Sunday, Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn also made a scathing reference to President Trump.
As London Mayor Sadiq Khan recognised, but which the current occupant of the White House has neither the grace nor the sense to grasp today, whether we are Muslim or Christian, black or white, male or female, gay or straight, we are united by our values, by a determination for a better world, and that we can build a better society.
And so that brings us back to, Paul Mason, Donald Trump's tweet against the first Muslim mayor of London. And if you think even that weighs in for the reason why he attacked Sadiq Khan.
There's not a single person on the right or left of politics who sympathises with what Trump is doing. The British Prime Minister Theresa May has eventually been forced this morning to distance herself and criticise Trump, but she did it very reluctantly. Others are just furious with it, because it seems like Trump has a thing about Sadiq Khan. It seems like the fact that one of the biggest, liberal global cities on earth has a Muslim mayor seems to annoy Trump every time he thinks about it. But this is beyond a joke. joke, because we are allies in the war on what is sensible about the war on terror, in finding out the terrorists, sharing intelligence, and trying to target them and prevent their activities. We're supposed to be allies. And for Trump to carry on this knee-jerk political attack on a guy he clearly just doesn't like because the guy's a Muslim, let's be honest, it's not helping. It's not helping. Now, what else is not helping? Today, you reported it earlier in your bulletin, we've got this huge diplomatic war breaking out in the Gulf, the very place both our countries have been obsessing about for 20 years. We've got the Saudi Arabia attacking Qatar, closing its airspace, disrupting the economy of the region. Why? Because Saudi accuses Qatar, this Gulf monarchy, of supporting ISIS. The truth is, Saudi Arabia has been pumping out money and resources for extreme Islamism for decades. And so has, to be honest, Qatar's done its bit as well, supporting the al-Qaeda groups in Syria, and so has Saudi Arabia. But why has this happened now? Because Trump visited Saudi Arabia. Trump gave Saudi Arabia some kind of green light to be much tougher rhetorically on Iran. And what is Saudi saying about Qatar this morning? Well, the Qataris are too soft on Iran. This, again, is Donald Trump meddling in issues and matters he just does not understand.
Well, I want to go back to Corbyn's speech on Sunday, because he also referred to Saudi Arabia, calling for, quote, some difficult conversations on Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states who he said were fueling extremist ideologies. He also accused the UK government, the May government, of, quote, suppressing a report into the foreign funding of extremist groups.
We do need to have some difficult conversations, starting with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states who have funded and fueled extremist ideology. It's no good, Theresa May, suppressing a report into the foreign funding of extremist groups. We have to get serious about cutting off their funding to these terror networks, including ISIS here and in the Middle East.
So that's Jeremy Corbyn speaking, a Labour leader speaking a Sunday night. Now, the elections are just in a matter of days on Thursday. So can you talk about what impact you think this attack will have, if any, on the election, and also explain what this report is that Corbyn says the May government is suppressing?
Yeah. Well, we're all trying not to politicise it. There are lessons to be learned from this attack that are just the technological and operational lessons of how you prevent and deter terrorism. But the fact is that Theresa May, has visited Saudi Arabia, has sold arms to Saudi Arabia, and the report that's been suppressed is a report commissioned by her predecessor, David Cameron, the Conservative Prime Minister. We are told that it implicates Saudi Arabia in the funding of terrorism, and it is being buried and suppressed, which we think is a bad idea. Now, your viewers must know that by Friday, Corbyn could be Prime Minister. It's unlikely because the Conservatives started this election with massive advantage. We have an even more biased press than you in the United States against the left and the Labour Party, but things are changing quite rapidly. And what I can tell your viewers is that if Corbyn is able to form a government on Friday, then the whole game is up for Western backing of these Wahhabi extreme dictators and head removers in Saudi Arabia, because Britain, sure, we are a country that's equally implicated in the long term in backing that regime and other unjust regimes in the Middle East. And if Corbyn gets into 10 Downing Street, he will stop that as day one, hour one, second one. And of course that will cause a big problem for Trump, but I think it is time we in the West had a long look at what is happening. Sure, Iran, Saudi Arabia's traditional enemy, is equally a sponsor of terror. It is equally repressive, but we need to be trying to export, as it were, values and restraint and multilateralism into that Gulf region, not, as we in the United Kingdom are doing currently, arming the Saudis so they can bomb Yemen, bomb hospitals, bomb people into starvation. So Corbyn represents a real change, and if any of your viewers feel like it, have British friends, please encourage them to have no hesitation in changing this government, because we want to do what you need to do. We need to get rid of the kind of dinosaurs of kind of the 20th century view of how one intervenes in the Middle East, and of course the 20th century view of Islamophobia, which I'm afraid Trump's comment in that tweet about Sadiq Khan speak volumes subtextually about the Islamophobic nature of Trump's administration.
May said in her speech about cracking down that the internet has provided a safe haven for terrorists, and that big companies that provide internet-based services have been complicit. What do you see coming out of this, Paul?
I think before we say anything else, we have to say that the analysis is correct. You know, we've got big companies claiming that they don't have any interest in the content that they create. If a newspaper carried an advertisement for Al-Qaeda or ISIS, that newspaper should be shut down. So, no, the internet, it is said, is ungovernable. That is also not true. It is governable in America, where most of those internet companies are based. I don't want to see the balkanization of the internet. I don't want to see increased surveillance. I don't want to see censorship. And of course, in America, unlike here, you have your First Amendment rights. But what I think is likely, and May's comments, I think May will be one of the last people to do this. People I've been speaking to in the past couple of weeks are more and more confident that sooner or later in the United States, those companies will be faced with a class action lawsuit which accuses them of facilitating the distribution of terrorist propaganda. Now, they need to wake up and think about how to regulate what is done there more clearly. And I would also say in the United States, look, your First Amendment rights are very, very important, precious to you. So is your right to carry arms. Here in the United Kingdom, the only reason we're not talking about maybe tens or hundreds dead is because those three guys could not put their finger on a 9mm pistol, let alone an assault rifle. They had to use knives because they can't get guns. And just bear that lesson in mind when we think about what both, you know, the constitutional freedoms we all hold dear, you know, come at a price. And how this relates to the internet, of course, is that if I don't want to see a big crackdown on freedom of expression and freedom of speech, but we have to work out how we stop people being radicalized online. See, the community those guys came from, it is known. It's a place in East London about 2 or 3 miles away from here called Barking, and that community knew them. That community reported them to the police. But the other community they must have been part of was an online network where people are being recruited. Now, I think we do, as a civil society, need to ask ourselves what powers we give to the state in order to find those networks. I don't think breaking encryption or banning encryption works, but we need targeted surveillance. And I think at that level, we do need web companies to start collaborating and cooperating with democratic states. Because otherwise, you create a safe space online where these guys are getting radicalized and getting their orders.
Paul Mason, we want to thank you very much for being with us. Of course, we'll continue to cover this issue and many others. Paul Mason, columnist for The Guardian, filmmaker based in London. His most recent book, Post-Capitalism, A Guide to Our Future. When we come back, President Trump has raised the Muslim ban as a response to what happened in London. So we'll discuss it. Stay with us.
Liar, liar, oh, she's a liar, liar. No, you can't trust her. No, 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 no. She's a liar, liar. Oh, she's a liar, liar. No, you can't trust her. No, 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 no. We all know politicians like telling lies. Big ones, little ones, porcupines, saying they're strong and stable, won't disguise. We're still being taken for a ride. The nurses going hungry, schools in decline. I don't recognize this broken country of mine. They're having a laugh, let's show them the door, then cut the rich, not the poor.
I've been very clear that I think we need that period of time, that stability, to be able to deal with the issues that the country is facing. I'm not going to be calling a snap election.
She's a liar, liar. Oh, she's a liar, liar. No, you can't trust her. No, 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 no. She's a liar.
Liar, Liar by Captain Ska. The song is a protest against British Prime Minister Theresa May. It rose to number 4 on the UK singles chart last week, even as the BBC refused to broadcast the song and made it unavailable for streaming on the BBC website. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
Following the attacks in London on Saturday night, President Trump launched a tweet storm this morning and over the weekend, insistently calling for the U.S. to impose his proposed Muslim travel ban. The ban would prohibit all refugees and citizens of 6 Muslim-majority countries from entering the United States. On Saturday, Trump tweeted, quote, "We need to be smart, vigilant, and tough. We need the courts to give us back our rights. We need the travel ban as an extra level of safety," unquote. Then this morning, Trump tweeted, quote, "People, the lawyers, and the courts can call it whatever they want, but I'm calling it what we need and what it is, a travel ban."
On Thursday, the Trump administration asked the Supreme Court to revive his Muslim travel ban, which has been blocked by multiple courts. The Trump administration has filed emergency applications with the 9 high court justices seeking to block 2 different lower court rulings that found the ban was discriminatory. The Supreme Court will deliberate on whether to allow the ban to go into effect. Among other things, it'll consider whether Trump's election campaign rhetoric can be used as evidence that the order was intended to discriminate against Muslims. For more, we're joined by Shana Kadidal, Senior Managing Attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights. It's great to have you back, Shana. Why don't you start off by responding to this tweet storm? For a long time, the Trump administration and his spokespeople were castigating the press, saying this is not a ban, this is about vetting. And now he's saying, call it what it is, a ban, and I want it imposed now.
Right. You know, the office that handles the President's Supreme Court appeals, the Solicitor General's office, is relatively apolitical, but I bet that the very nice guy who runs it right now, Jeff Wall, is probably pulling out his remaining hair on this. Because one of the few decent sort of issues that they had in this appeal was the idea that somehow, because Travel Ban 2.0 contained the ability to ask for a special waiver, you know, it's a ban on sort of issuing visas, but you could ask for an individual waiver. And they said, well, this means that the plaintiffs aren't really harmed because they haven't asked for waivers yet, right? And by calling it a ban, I think it certainly makes this look much more like the waiver provision was just inserted there, you know, as you know, something essentially to kind of be able to allow the government to make a standing argument, not to really put holes in what otherwise in version 1.0 was a flat-out ban.
So now, just explain one thing. He is asking the Supreme Court to allow the ban to go into effect while they consider it. Is that right?
Right, which is a little remarkable, right? It's always hard to get the Supreme Court's attention on short notice, but this ban expires a week from Wednesday. And there's no disagreement between the courts of appeals, which is the usual other thing that gets the Supreme Court's attention, right? The Ninth Circuit in the Washington and the Hawaii cases has already, well, I guess in the Washington case, has weighed in, as well as the Fourth Circuit in the Maryland case. So there's no disagreement among the courts of appeals either. But the key point is that there's only a few days left in the original ban anyway.
But in the meanwhile, though, Shana, isn't it the case that Trump has already put in place, or the application, the new application for visas has been approved, right? Which calls for extreme vetting, which requires applicants to provide social media information and something like 15 years of employment and resident history?
I haven't followed the actual procedures that are in place, but the version 2.0 of the ban, the executive order, said that all these new procedures were essentially supposed to be done by the time the ban was set to expire, which again, you know, is a week from Wednesday.
It was also quite something that President Trump attacked his own Justice Department, saying the Justice Department should have stayed with the original travel ban, not the watered-down, politically correct version they submitted to SC for Supreme Court. That's what he tweeted.
Right. Sort of amazing. You know, you know, maybe the only real kind of merits issue that seemed to have a little bit of traction in the academic commentary was the idea that somehow you shouldn't be allowed to hold a candidate's statements against him, right? Candidates make sort of, you know, casually tossed off statements all the time. You know, and people have asked, you know, well, does this, you know, do the Court of Appeals those rulings mean that any restriction on entry from Muslim countries during the next 4 years is going to be ruled to violate the religion clauses of the Constitution. And I think that kind of misses the key point, which is that what's really missing is the other side. There's no national security justification that the government has managed to produce here. In fact, Trump's own Department of Homeland Security found that there was no national security rationale for this. And that, along with the imminent expiry of the original ban, are entirely missing from the Solicitor General's papers. So if Trump was going to criticize something, maybe that's what he should have criticized.
Well, we turn now to another issue. Is the Trump administration attempting to erase history? On Friday, congressional officials confirmed the administration has begun returning to Congress copies of the Senate's explosive 2014 report on CIA torture. The move raises concerns that copies of the classified report will now be buried in a Senate vaults or even destroyed, and along with it, lessons from one of the darkest chapters in America's history. Under the Obama administration, the 6,770-page landmark investigative Senate report was initially sent to federal agencies in the hope it would eventually be made public. Now the reports will be returned to the Republican-controlled Senate. Documents held by Congress are not subjected to laws requiring government records to eventually be made public. On Friday, the American Civil Liberties Union said in a statement, quote, "It would be a travesty for agencies to return the CIA torture report instead of reading and learning from it. As senators intended, this critically important investigation should have been made public."
Democrats are expressing fear that the Trump administration intends to erase electronic copies and destroy hard copies of the report. In a statement, Democratic Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon accused the Trump administration of seeking to, quote, "pave the way for the kind of falsehoods used to justify an illegal and dangerous torture program," unquote. Throughout the campaign and since taking office, President Trump has voiced his support for torture. This is ABC's David Muir questioning Trump about torture in January.
Mr. President, you told me during one of the debates that you would bring back waterboarding and a hell of a lot worse.
I would do what I would do. I want to keep our country safe. I want to keep our country safe.
What does that mean?
When they're shooting, when they're chopping off the heads of our people and other people, when they're chopping off the heads of people because they happen to be a Christian in the Middle East, when ISIS is doing things that nobody has ever heard of since medieval times, would I feel strongly about waterboarding? As far as I'm concerned, we have to fight fire with fire. I have spoken as recently as 24 hours ago with people at the highest level of intelligence, and I asked them the question, does it work? Does torture work? And the answer was yes, absolutely.
So that was President Trump speaking to ABC's David Muir in January. The Freedom of the Press Foundation is now calling for whistleblowers within the Trump administration to contact the press before the Senate torture report is potentially lost forever. The group tweeted, quote, "If you work for the Trump administration and your conscience compels you to blow the whistle, you can use Secure Drop to contact the press." Well, for more, we're joined, continuing to be joined by Shana Kadidal, the senior managing attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights. CCR represents two men named as former CIA prisoners in the executive summary of the Senate torture report that was released in 2014. Majid Khan and Guled Hassan Duran are both currently held at Guantanamo. So, Shana, talk about the significance of what the Trump administration is doing with this report.
Sure. Well, it's certainly highly significant to individual cases, right? It's useful to go back a little bit, I guess, to remind ourselves what has been released and what we might still be waiting on, right? So in December 2014, after many years of struggle with the Obama administration over essentially redaction and classification review of the parts of the report, they release the 525-page executive summary, right, which shows, among other things, that techniques that were applied were much worse than what was revealed in those torture memos under the Bush administration, right, that it was applied against a lot more people than was previously discussed, and that group of people included at least 26 people who were wrongly suspected of involvement in terrorism, basically, right, against people who were, quote-unquote, innocent, right? that the techniques exceeded the legal authorization that was spelled out in those memos, and that finally really nothing productive came out of the torture and detention program, right? That there wasn't actionable intelligence that came out of it, and that there wasn't cooperation induced among detainees, right? And that bottom line is, I think, the most important thing that probably remains to be reinforced by the 6,000 plus pages that haven't been released, that haven't been redacted into unclassified form and released publicly, right? We only know this because of what Senator Feinstein has said, but she says that the remaining portion of the report that Senator Burr is trying to bury, that the agencies are returning, contains a great deal more detail about the ineffectiveness of the program, how it didn't produce useful intelligence like the CIA claimed, and it responds in great detail to the CIA's own defense of the program. Then on top of that, we also know from Feinstein's cover letter to the executive summary that there are detailed chapters essentially on all of the 119 detainees. So this might be very useful in their individual cases, certainly might be useful in the sentencing proceeding of our client Majid Khan, who cut a plea and cooperate agreement, and potentially in the habeas corpus case arguing for his freedom for Khalid Hassan Duran, our other client in the CIA program.
Well, Burr is a longtime critic of the report, which he's described as disreputable and overly critical of the CIA and the George W. Bush administration. At one point, he called the report nothing more than, quote, a footnote in history. So could you explain why you think the Republicans are so averse to releasing this report, and what, we can speculate is in the report that might be particularly critical of them?
Right. It's $1 million question, right? I mean, this is a 6,000 plus page footnote. It was the product of 5 years of intensive labor by Senate staffers. The Senate Intelligence Committee voted almost unanimously to conduct the inquiry, 14-1 in 2005 when the whole thing got started, right? So it's really mysterious, why they want to bury it. And I think the only clue that we really have to it is what Feinstein has said about what's in there, which is precisely that it undercuts the CIA's argument that the program was somehow effective in producing intelligence, in disrupting active terrorist threats, in helping find Osama bin Laden. And, obviously with the Republican president out there extolling the virtues of torture once again in a way that would have seemed remarkable during the 2008 campaign when both John McCain and Senator Obama were saying that we needed to kind of move on from it. It's, I think, pretty clear that this is simply a partisan attempt to make sure that the public isn't exposed to the idea that torture doesn't work, right? Which polling data remarkably shows most people haven't even heard that statement. They haven't heard that argument.
Is there any chance, you think, given this opposition, that the report may eventually be released, or is it now a foregone conclusion that it won't?
Well, so no. There are 4 copies that are apparently being returned, all from intelligence agencies, basically the FBI, 2 copies from the CIA, and the Director of National Intelligence's copy. But there are 3 copies that are still out there, outside of the Senate's copies, right? One is with President Obama's National Archives presidential records. That can't be released by law, I think, until 2028. But that one's safe for now. Then there are 2 others that are being held pursuant to court preservation orders because they might be important to cases, one from the military commissions and one from the habeas cases. So those will still be out there, but it's obviously very difficult to get any record like this declassified. It took 4 years just to get that executive summary out under President Obama. So it's a long, long struggle. And, I think, one key point that you mentioned at the outset is we want the agencies to read this so that they learn from it and so that it never happens again.
WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange tweeted, "Trump, threatened by resistance, CIA alliance, gives CIA concessions from prosecuting WikiLeaks to hiding torture." Your response?
Well, I don't think, Trump needed to make concessions. His statements about torture seem, sort of crazy when we think back to the bipartisan consensus against it at earlier times. But, he may be crazy like a fox here. The polling data since the middle of the Bush administration shows consistently 2 things. One, that the public is unfamiliar with the idea that torture doesn't work. And second, that evangelicals strongly support torture, not because they think it works, but because they think it's justified punishment. And there, when you understand that, you understand the kind of evil genius of Trump's campaign statement that, sure, it works, and even if it doesn't work, they deserved it anyway.
Very quickly, Shana, before we go, you've been talking about the origins of ISIS.
Sure. I think, with everything that's in the news lately, it's important to remember something that got buried when it was first reported on, right when the torture report summary came out in late 2014, which is that 25 of the 27 top leaders of ISIS were all held together by the United States in Camp Bucca, which was a Guantanamo-like detention facility where we held both kind of religious radicals like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was there, and a whole bunch of people from the Ba'ath Party who were bureaucrats and military experts, generals from Saddam Hussein's army, right? And, the crazy kind of mix that we have with ISIS of religious millenarians and people with actual expertise in running battlefield campaigns, which you usually don't see because good generals usually don't think the rapture is coming tomorrow. That was pulled together in Camp Bucca, where people were being abused because of their sectarian affiliation and their Muslim religion, right? Just like what happened at Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib and everywhere else. So, bottom line with ISIS is, and we see this reported so infrequently, is we made this. We created this movement and its leadership with our own misguided and amateurish detention and interrogation policies. And by keeping Guantanamo open, by speaking approvingly of torture, President Trump is doing nothing more than running a long-standing kind of commercial for ISIS.
Shana Kadid, I want to thank you for being with us. I'm a senior managing attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights. When we come back, we'll be joined by the Senate President Pro Tem of the California Senate. We'll be back with him in a moment.
Evil walks the streets today, 'cause evil wants to have its way. Evil had a clever scheme. It understood the poor man's dream. It told him what he wants to hear, and fed upon his deepest fear. Evil walks and evil talks. It's got a name, yeah. Can't you feel those evil eyes on you? What you gonna do? Don't tell me it's alright, because it's not alright.
By JC and the Jags here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We end today's show in California, where the state Senate just passed legislation to put the state on a path to 100% clean, renewable energy by the year 2045. California is just one of dozens of state and local governments committing to fight climate change after President Trump announced Thursday the country will pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. This comes after the environmental ministers of Canada and Mexico visited San Francisco in April to sign a global pact that was drafted largely by California to lower planet-warming greenhouse pollution.
Nearly 200 U.S. mayors have signed on to an agreement to uphold the commitments to the goals enshrined in the Paris Agreement. As a state with the world's sixth largest economy, analysts often cite California as a model for its ambitious environmental policy. For more, we're going right to the state capital of California, Sacramento, where we're joined by Kevin DeLeon, President Pro Tem of the California State Senate. Welcome back to Democracy Now! Talk first about President Trump pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Accord, and then what you're doing about it.
Well, good morning, Amy, and good morning, Nermeen. I can say this. This is our reality. We're not going to allow one huge, potentially catastrophic decision by the president to reverse generations of progress at the height of our historic diversity, our scientific advancement, our economic output, as well as our sense of global responsibility. We refuse to go back and recede. So we're moving forward. We're forging ahead with 100% clean energy, Senate Bill 100. It's the most far-reaching, ambitious proposal of its kind in the nation, in the entire world. We can't retreat now, given the fact that the president has demonstrated and shown to the world that he has actually served the climate leadership mantle directly to the Chinese, and obviously the Chinese are more than happy to assume the role to be the world leader when it comes to climate energy. So we're moving forward with 100% clean energy. We'll generate all of our energy from clean energy, renewable sources, whether it's wind, solar, or geothermal. It's a huge step forward, but we have no choice and we have to move forward if, in fact, we're going to continue to grow our economy. And one point I want to make especially is this is not just about the environment. This is about the economy, because we have created upwards up to 500,000 new jobs in the clean energy space. And to put this in context for all Americans, Democrats and Republicans alike, there are 10 times more jobs in California in the clean energy space than there are in the coal mining industry in all of America.
Well, California has the world's 6th largest economy. Could you talk about what you expect the effect of California's climate agenda to be on the issue of climate change, also globally and locally in California and in the United States?
Well, we have successfully delinked and decoupled carbon from GDP. What that means is that we are 39% less carbon intensive as a state since 1990 levels, and we have created upwards up to 500,000 jobs to become the 6th largest economy in the world. There are only 5 larger economies in the world than that of California. But we have done so by sending the right market signals that have attracted the necessary capital, that have created the technologies that have helped us meet our ambitious target goals. It's through good public policy. It's through intentionality and a sense of purpose, wanting to decarbonize our economy, create jobs, grow our economy, put people to work, at the same time clean our air so our children can breathe cleaner air. We do believe strongly that it's a model, not just for the rest of the nation and hemispherically, but also for the rest of the entire world.
So can you talk about your governor, Governor Brown's trip to China, and also what it means for Trump to pull out of the climate accord? If California is just moving forward, what difference did this climate accord mean? How is it going to set you back? Will they prevent you from carrying forward on what you want to do?
Well, Governor Brown right now, as we speak, is in China meeting with leaders throughout the country. Secondly, this could be potentially catastrophic for the United States' economy. It would be a big blow to our jobs. So that's why we need to forge ahead sooner rather than later. And quite frankly, as a subnational, but with the 6th largest economy in the world, it's our responsibility, both legally as well as morally and scientifically, to engage with other subnationals throughout the country, as well as throughout the world, as well as other national governments, whether it be Canada, our friend to the north, or our friend to the south, Mexico, as well as Emmanuel Macron from France, who perhaps shortly will be coming to the United States and specifically to the state of California. So it is incumbent on us to really engage other subnationals, other provinces, as well as other national governments to forge ahead with or without Washington. And I want to be very clear about something, Amy, is we are going to move forward with or without Donald Trump. He cannot stop the momentum that's happening in California, and quite frankly, he can't halt the global momentum happening right now with regards to climate policies.
Well, several state senators in California have been asking Governor Brown to convene a climate summit, partnering with Mexico and Canada. Could you talk about what you think such a summit would achieve and whether Brown is likely to grant this request?
I think this is quite possible. You know, we've spoken, in fact, just recently, just sometime last week, we had a private conversation about convening like-minded nations as well as provinces and subnationals, again, like our friend to the north and our friend to the south, coming together in light of the decision that President Trump has just made recently and forge our minds together, share technologies, share our climate leadership, and export it across the world. And the bottom line is this, is we as a state will step up at the international level if, in fact, Washington steps down. And it looks like they are stepping down, so we will move forward ahead. It is really important that we forge ahead with other like-minded countries and subnationals, not just hemispherically, but throughout the world, whether it is in the Pacific Rim, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Europe, Eastern Europe. We need to move forward because we have no other choice, because this is not a scientific issue. All the Nobel Prize winners, all of the climate science, scientific researchers have clearly said this is not sustainable. This is a political issue. It is a leadership issue, and it is a lack of leadership from Washington. So we have no other choice but rather to step up and move forward.
Kevin DeLeon, we want to thank you for being with us, speaking to us from Sacramento as your governor. Governor Brown is in China. Kevin DeLeon is President Pro Tem of the California State Senate. And that does it for our broadcast. If you want to read the transcript or get the video or audio podcast, you can go to democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Ravi Karen, Hani Massoud, Trina Nadura, Andre Lewis, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Paul Huckabee are our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Stelly. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.